I never thought the day would come when the very people I trusted to protect my community would try to take away what was mine. It started one quiet morning when I was preparing my old tractor for the day's work on our family's land. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, and the gentle breeze reminded me of the stories my father used to tell about honest hard work and the land that had been in our family for generations. As I was driving along the dusty road, my phone began to ring off the hook. One missed call turned into a string of urgent messages. Neighbors were calling, my cousin left a message in a shaky voice, and then an official email arrived from the homeowners association. It claimed that the noise from my tractor was disturbing the peace and that my livestock were causing a terrible smell that might lower the property value in our quiet neighborhood. They demanded that I shut down my operations within 48 hours or face steep fines. I couldn't help but laugh at how absurd it sounded. They did not understand that I have lived and breathed this land all my life. I knew then that I had to stand up and fight. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, a sleek black car pulled up near my farmhouse. Out stepped a tall woman with neat, pressed pants and a stern look. She clutched a clipboard tightly and was flanked by 2 board members from the HOA. "I'm Marjorie Coleman, president of the Greenwood Estates HOA," she declared in a crisp voice. "We need to discuss your so-called violations." I crossed my arms and replied calmly, "There is nothing here that violates any rule. This land has been in my family for over 100 years, and I run my farm the way we always have." Marjorie's smile did not reach her eyes. Instead, she dropped a bomb that nearly knocked me off my boots. "According to the county records, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land now falls under our regulations." My heart pounded as I realized what they were trying to pull. The tax bills hadn't changed, and not one official had mentioned any such expiration before. I told her firmly, "No law can suddenly give you ownership of my land." Her smile turned icy and she handed me a sealed order. "You have your choice," she said, before turning on her heel and disappearing down the road. After she left, my gut told me something was very wrong. I called my cousin Henry, who lived nearby and served on the town council. His voice was hushed as he told me that Marjorie had been meeting privately with local developers. "They've been rewriting the meeting minutes after the fact," he confided. "I think they planned this move for months." At that moment, I felt the cold grip of betrayal and the weight of the injustice. I decided to do my own research that evening by digging through old county records. To my great relief, I discovered that my farm still qualified for the agricultural exemption, for another 5 years, no less. Marjorie's words were a lie meant to force me into submission. For the next week, I ignored the threatening letters and the mounting fines. Soon, the calls from the local sheriff began. Sheriff Daniels, an old friend from high school, stopped by with concerns over complaints of noise and disturbances. I could barely contain my frustration when he explained, "Neighbor after neighbor is complaining, and there's even talk of a petition to label your farm a public nuisance." I told him, "My family has fed this county for generations. Something isn't right here." He hesitated before softly adding, "I heard whispers that your land might be part of a massive development plan. They might be planning to grab it all right under your nose." I was shaken by this news, especially when a group of strangers in dark suits was spotted on my eastern fields. They took pictures and measured the boundaries of my property as if everything was open for discussion. In a burst of anger, I jumped into my truck and drove straight toward them. "Help! This is private property!" I roared as I screeched to a stop next to them. A tall gentleman in an expensive suit calmly introduced himself as George Martin from Blue Ridge Development. "We are surveying the land for planning purposes," he explained coolly. My eyes narrowed and I demanded, "Planning purposes? I have never agreed to any survey." He produced a folder of official documents, complete with county stamps and even a signature that looked uncannily like mine. But I knew deep in my heart that I had never signed anything that would permit the sale of a piece of my land. I rushed back home and retrieved every deed and document I had stored safely over the years. Everything was in order, yet the evidence from the county recorder's office was damning. The clerk's tone was regretful, "Sir, our records show that 1,700 acres have been transferred to the Greenwood Estates Community Trust about 6 weeks ago. You now own only 300 acres. My hands trembled as I carefully examined the paper. There, in plain sight, was a forged version of my signature. In that moment, I realized that not only had the HOA sold off a huge chunk of my family's farmland, but they had also stolen the one thing that truly gave me power. Even as I mulled over the injustice, I noticed a familiar car parked at the far edge of my property. Marjorie sat there in a luxurious SUV, watching me as if she enjoyed the chaos. When I caught her eye, she offered a thin smile and a dismissive wave. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Late that night, I sat on the creaky porch of my old farmhouse and remembered something my grandfather had once told me about water rights. In 1943, he had signed an agreement with the county to help build a reservoir right on our land. That deal had given our family complete control over the water supply. No one could use even a drop of that water without our say-so. The HOA and those crooked developers had made a fatal error when they forged my signature and stole my farmland. They never realized that they could never steal what gave me real power. The next morning, I took my case to court. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, from old deeds to the reservoir agreement. My lawyer explained that fighting against a mighty group of developers and corrupt officials could take years, even if we proved the forgery. But I had no choice. I had to make them understand that you could never beat a man who controls the water. Days turned into weeks, and while my legal battle wove its slow, painful course through the court system, the developers pushed forward with their plans. Bulldozers, cranes, and heavy trucks began rolling into what used to be our open fields. They tore down barns, ripped up fences, and began clearing the land for a sprawling urban development filled with luxury condos, high-end shopping centers, and glassy office towers. I watched it all from the edge of my remaining land, my heart aching as I remembered the decades of sweat and sacrifice that built this place. Every piece of news about the development made the headlines: mega project defies local laws, water rights at center of land scandal, farmers fight back in land theft case. But while the public focused on the crooked dealings of the HOA and the greedy promises of the developers, they overlooked one simple truth: my water rights. Every drop of water flowing from that reservoir had been mine since my grandfather's time, and no one had the right to take that away. It wasn't long before the developers came to me with a meeting request. The conference room they chose was in one of the tallest, shinily modern office buildings in the city. The room was filled with nervous executives, high-powered lawyers, and even a few local politicians. At the far end of the long table sat Marjorie, her face set in determination. A well-dressed man began, "We can settle this matter without further legal action. How much do you want for the water rights?" I stared across the table and said calmly, "I don't want money. I want what is rightfully mine back, control of my land and the water that runs through it." There was a brief silence before another man spoke. "This is absurd. The government approved the development. You are just one man." I replied, voice steady and strong, "The government may have approved the development on paper, but they never thought about the water. You built your fancy towers on stolen land, and now every building, every park, every home depends on my reservoir." Their faces changed from smug confidence to worry. One lawyer leaned forward and offered, "Perhaps we can renegotiate the terms. Maybe a higher lump sum or a revised contract." But before he could finish, Marjorie burst out in anger, "Shut up. You know this project will never run without water." I chuckled softly and added, "Exactly. You have 48 hours to cancel the sale of my land and restore everything to me. If not, I will make sure that every owner, every investor, and even every resident knows that without my water, your dream development will crumble like sand." The next day, the news exploded across every media outlet. Headlines screamed about a scandal, a massive fraud, and a public betrayal that implicated not just a few crooked executives, but the entire homeowners association. Investors started pulling out their money, and construction halted as a cloud of uncertainty covered the project. Phone calls, angry protests, and legal threats came from every direction. It seemed as though the developers had underestimated the power of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. I received several secret phone calls from an old friend on the town council, suggesting that Marjorie and her allies had been cutting deals behind closed doors. They admitted that the project was never truly about building new homes or creating jobs. It was always about lining the pockets of a few rich men at the expense of our community. With this knowledge, I decided to change tactics. Instead of trying to reclaim my land through a long and draining legal battle, I began to use the very thing they had taken from me to my advantage. I turned my focus to the water rights. I started negotiating with the developers, telling them that they could use my water only if they paid a fee that would soon grow to astronomical levels. Without water, I told them in a measured tone during one particularly tense meeting, none of your fancy condos, your pristine shopping centers, or your glittering office towers will function. You may have built on my land illegally, but you will always need my water. Their faces turned ashen as they realized that my leverage was far greater than any forged signature or corrupt contract. Over the next several months, I watched as the project slowly ground to a halt. With every delayed construction, every renegotiated contract, my bank account began to fill up steadily. I became not just a man fighting for his family's legacy, but a symbol of how one honest farmer could stand up against a tidal wave of corruption and greed. I refused to be the quiet victim. Each meeting, every new contract signed, was my way of saying that the land and its water would never be taken by force without consequence. I continued to face off with Marjorie in public hearings, town council meetings, and even on local television interviews. You may have all the money and power, but you overlooked the one thing that always matters, I would say, my voice echoing in every courtroom and public forum. I control the water. And without water, you have nothing. Even as legal challenges rolled in and the developers scrambled to find loopholes, the truth was clear. The law could not ignore the centuries-old water rights that were bound to my family. One evening, after a long day of heated negotiations, I sat by the edge of the reservoir and remembered the promises my grandfather had made when he first signed that agreement in 1943. He had believed that there was something sacred about the land and the water, a trust that each generation would honor the legacy by protecting it from those who wished to exploit it. In that quiet moment, with the soft sound of water lapping at the shore, I vowed that I would never let the forces of greed and corruption break that trust. The turning point came when I discovered that the developers had secretly planned to build an additional housing project using water that was meant to be conserved. It was then that I released my official statement to the press. I detailed every injustice, the forged signatures, the illegal land transfers, and the fraudulent deals that had been made behind closed doors. The media caught wind of the scandal, and soon the headlines read, "Water War erupts over stolen land, Farmer Fights Back, Control the Water, Control the Future," and HOA Scandal, When Greed Meets the Reservoir. The public outcry was fierce, and the pressure on the local government was immense. Investors who had once been confident now started to back out one by one, and soon the entire development was brought to a standstill. Court dates were set, more evidence was uncovered, and the truth was slowly coming to light. Lawyers from both sides began to realize that fighting against a man who controlled the water might cost them far more than they ever imagined. It was not long before negotiations took a dramatic turn. In an emergency meeting held in a city skyscraper, the developers, the lawyers, and even a representative from the mayor's office gathered around a long, imposing table. I walked in with my lawyer by my side, calm and resolute. A suited man finally broke the tense silence. "We can resolve this, but what exactly do you want in return for allowing us to use your water rights?" I leaned forward slightly and said, "I want my family's legacy returned to me. I want the full rights of my land and a lifetime lease for every drop of water you use. From now on, every building you erect, every square foot of your project, will come at a price." The room fell silent as the weight of my words sunk in. Marjorie tried to interject, "This is extortion. You cannot force us into this arrangement." I simply smiled and replied, "I am not asking for extortion. I am simply charging for the use of what is rightfully mine. Without my water, your project will collapse. You have no choice." In that moment, the power balance shifted dramatically. They could not risk the collapse of their multi-million-dollar investment. One by one, even the most stubborn executives began to nod in reluctant agreement. I spent the next several weeks finalizing contracts. The media coverage was relentless, painting me as a modern-day David taking on a Goliath of corporate corruption. Every month, without fail, payments arrived. The money poured in like a steady stream, a small payment at first, then gradually increasing to a sum that brought a smile to my weathered face. For the first time in years, I felt in control, not just of my land, but of the destiny that had once been stolen from me. Yet, even as I triumphed legally and financially, a part of me could not let go of the bitter taste of betrayal. Marjorie continued to lurk in the background, making quiet attempts to regain control. One day, during a meeting that seemed less urgent than the others, she whispered harshly, "You may control the water for now, but we are not finished with you. This is not over." I met her gaze steadily and said, "I'm not afraid of your threats. Every time you try to twist the truth, I will remind everyone who the true owner is. I built my empire on the strength of my family, and that legacy is unbreakable." In the months that followed, my control of the water rights not only saved the development from collapse, but it also turned into a powerful business venture. I began to invest the revenue into new projects, modern farms that used the latest technology, community centers that benefited the local people, and even schools that taught the next generation about the importance of the land and water. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt what had been almost stolen from me, turning it into something stronger than before. I became known not just as a stubborn farmer, but as a savvy businessman who understood that sometimes you have to fight fire with water. The courtroom verdict finally came, confirming that the forged signature was indeed a fraud and that the fraudulent transfer was illegal. By that time, it hardly mattered if I could reclaim every inch of the stolen acreage. I had already secured my future by ensuring that my family's water rights were ironclad. The developers, faced with mounting losses and public disgrace, saw no way out and reluctantly accepted the terms I had set. Their grand project was now forever bound to my contracts, and every drop of water that flowed through their pipelines was a reminder that no one could buy my heritage without paying the price. Today, I sit at the old wooden table in the kitchen of my farmhouse, looking out over the reservoir that my grandfather once helped build. I remember the long, hard days, the endless negotiations, and the painful betrayal that nearly broke me. But I also remember the strength that came from knowing who I am and where I come from. I built an empire not with stolen riches or empty promises, but with a single, unyielding truth, that the water, and the legacy it represents, will always belong to the one who knows its worth. I know that some will say I am a greedy man, extorting money from those who built their fortunes on stolen promises. But I see it as simple justice. When they tried to take away my family's land and my water, they forgot one thing. Water is life, and life is worth fighting for. The day that I turned the tables was the day I reclaimed not just my land, but my dignity, my history, and my future. And every month, when the payments come in, I am reminded that the very people who tried to crush me are now paying to lean on the very thing they lost long ago. In the end, my fight was not just about land or water, it was about respect. It was about making sure that the legacy of hard work, passed down from generation to generation, could never be taken away by a few men in suits. I stand here not only as a proud farmer but as a guardian of my family's story, a story of loss, of battle, and ultimately, of victory. And every time I look at the shimmering water in the reservoir, I smile, knowing that I hold the one thing that they could never steal, the power to control my own destiny,